Welcome to RFI's Banking Uncovered, the podcast going behind the industry PR, the media spin, the product awards and the investor reports to look at what's really going on in the customer data and to ask global thought leaders about their thoughts and views on the future of banking and payments.
Welcome to RFI's Banking Uncovered, where we go behind the investor reports, the industry PR and the media spin to look at what's really going on in the customer data and what's actually happening in banking. Today we have a global edition for you where I'm joined by my co-host Chloe James from Adelaide in Australia and also by Steve Weston, originally from Australia, but now sitting in Canary Wharf as Head of Everyday Money Management at Barclays UK. So welcome to the podcast, Steve, and over to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, really great to be here. And I love that we're doing this sort of global perspective here. Sitting in Australia, it's great to be talking to an Aussie in Steve, but obviously, as you mentioned, Charlie, based in London now, where you have spent a lot of time. We'll go into that, Steve. But really nice to have you here again. I love the Head of Everyday Money Management. I was feeling like I could really do with some everyday money management, so hopefully you can help me out with that. I should say I used to run the whole mortgage book at Barclays as head of mortgages, one of the biggest jobs in banking in the UK, before a return to Australia actually in 2016-17, when you entered the neobank scene and the fintech scene, founding Volt Bank, and now back in the UK. So we're really looking forward to sort of speaking to you about that. So Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Chloe, and it is good to be back, and it's been a few years, and you mentioned Volt Bank, which is like a career-defining moment for me and for many others, where we set up a challenger bank, but unfortunately we couldn't raise the large amount of capital that we needed to scale, and we had to shut up shop. And I've been back at Barclays now for 4 months. Frankly, I couldn't have, just from a heart perspective, after founding Volt and getting so genuinely close to disrupting the incumbent banks, to have to turn up every day to work for one of those banks. Some people could do it, but I just couldn't, from a heart, a stomach and a head perspective. And I love my time in the UK, and Barclays were kind enough to have me back. So I've been back now 4 months and really enjoying it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that, actually, because we sort of wanted to maybe broach that question, but I love hearing that was a little bit of the driver and sort of, the driving change and thought behind that before maybe, not heading into an Aussie bank and going back over. I'm really interested in hearing all of those learnings you had with Volt, because, you were around for quite a number of years with Volt, 7-8 years. The learnings that you're sort of taking from that back into, a more traditional bank. So we'll come on to that, but we've got some, questions we want to run through with you for the podcast, and we'll chit chat back and forth between Charlie and Steve and I. So just starting off with the first one, wanted to talk to you about branches, really. So really a traditional banking piece there. Barclays is known to be one of the digital first banks, and you do have that younger customer base compared to many of the other high street banks in the UK. RFI data, which we'll be keeping on bringing into the episode today, shows that Gen Z are the heaviest users of branches, with 42%, quite a high number there, using branch almost on a monthly basis, which is actually higher than any other UK demographic. It's pretty amazing there. Got that race to acquire those Gen Z really heating up. Fintechs competing heavily, especially over in the UK, and you are very familiar with that space. And a third of Gen Z wanting really innovative services from their branch. What does that mean for Barclays and branches, and how are Barclays thinking about branches now and sort of into the future?
So there's been some replacements that aren't all that well known and talked about, and so maybe I can share some of those stats. So Barclays today still has more than 800 points of physical representation, and as we moved out of particular local communities and closed branches, we would go back in and talk to local councils, to community groups and the like, and we come up with a concept called Barclays Local, where we'll have physical points of representation, maybe not on the high street, but in libraries, in community centres and the like. We also have some pods, which are semi-permanent type structures that are in shopping centres. We have 20 electric vans that we send out to community events, sporting events and the like. And that's Barclays specific. So a lot of those are non-cash, but help out with customer inquiries and lending and those sorts of things. And then as part of the industry, more recently, there's been this concept of shared banking hubs, which are typically a branch that is on the high street. It's organised and managed by the post office, but I think there's a couple over a dozen, maybe there's 14 or 15 different banks that will attend to these shared banking hubs on certain days and certain hours, and let the customers know, so the customers can come in to talk to their bank, but in the shared banking hub. And I think they'll end up something like 100 shared banking hubs at the end of this year. But on the website, there are plans for that number to increase significantly in the future. So that's something the industry has done. The post office has really ramped up its banking presence as well. So there's 11,500 post offices in the UK where people can deposit checks and make payments and withdraw cash and those sorts of things, as well as ATMs. And the ATMs, in terms of functionality, a number of those will accept deposits. Now, Barclays is big on the merchant acquiring. So if there's a Barclay card merchant, if you have a Visa or MasterCard, a debit card, you can go into those merchants and withdraw up to £100 in cash without needing to make a purchase. So there's a number of things that have happened to kind of fill the void of branches reducing. And I just thought I'd share that with you. It might be of interest to some of your listeners. It's not something that's all that well known. Certainly, I didn't know about that coming from Australia.
Vaguely familiar with the post office, but I wasn't, and the shared hubs as a concept, I wasn't aware it had been rolled out quite as much of that. I mean, just talking about the reason for this interest in usage of branches by Gen Z is, according to our RFI data, 20% of Gen Z and millennials don't know how to bank digitally, or don't have the tools to bank digitally, or know how to use the tools to bank digitally, and 25% of Gen Z and millennials require assistance when performing banking tasks digitally, which is more than any other kind of demographic segment within the UK. Just in the last couple of weeks, I'm sure you've seen, we've seen Monzo release these accounts for children. Revolut had just got their the initial stage of their banking license, and will probably do something similar. So when you're thinking about that problem, how are Barclays thinking about adapting or developing both their digital banking and their digital tools to help solve that kind of lack of financial education, if you like, going forward?
So Charles, maybe I touch on Barclays stats, which are a little different to the RFI stats, and it would be good to understand. So we're talking Barclays specific here. So high level numbers, a bit over 20 million customers, of which about 20% of those are under 30. So let's call that a Gen Z and younger demographic. Of those, almost all of them are digital completely, or digital with the assistance of speaking to someone either in a physical location or on a call centre. So of the 20% of our customers, now that number is growing. So if you look at the new customers we acquire each month, about 40% are under the age of 30, to your point. But just in terms of this digital usage, 3/4 of them are digital only, and that compares to 60% of all of our customers. So we find our under 30s are more likely not to want to talk to a human. And for those who do, it's typically infrequent, and it's typically to do with a life moment where they've got a lending need, they're concerned about a payment, a fraud, or a scam. But most of the customers are, most of the under 30s are digital only, as we call it. Certainly, there are real learnings from looking at what the challenges is doing and the ways that they've been able to really effectively engage the younger demographic. And Commonwealth Bank, it's a bank that's retail foundations were built on school banking, Charles, where, the students would take a little envelope in with cash in, and they had a book in the old days, and they'd get a stamp, and people never left. They'd take their mortgage and they'd bank for life. So being able to acquire customers at a younger age and then manage them through a life cycle is going to become more and more of a battleground, not just here in the UK, but globally.
I really love the innovation there on just back to that sort of first point about human interaction. And thanks, Steve, for sharing those points about obviously branches closing, but Barclays really putting a lot of attention into other ways to have touch points and this, shared services, shared banking. I think that's really interesting. Sounds like a good way to acquire customers is maybe you show up on the day that another bank's got the spot. But
so come here.
Yeah. But no, it's a really, really interesting touch point. I guess as well, talking about the Gen Z and especially bringing up that life moments. We say a life moment's often taking out a mortgage, right? And I guess not a lot of people are doing that before 30, are they, at the moment? So that probably makes
it's getting tougher and tougher, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is, and it's getting later and later because just exactly part as accessibility and affordability. Absolutely. We want to talk to you a little bit about fintech and payments. So this will obviously bring in some of those experiences from Volt and bringing it into Barclays. Back to some RFI data again. According to our UK data, 75% of consumers who use fintechs for payments, either domestically or across border, we hear that they are likely to switch their main bank compared to those who don't use fintechs at all, which is obviously a huge threat to the high street banks like Barclays and others. How do those stats affect how you think about payments in your value proposition and especially in your role of head of money management?
Yeah, it's a good point. Now, remind me to talk on, you talked about inclusion before and certainly if we look at vulnerable customers, remind me to come back to digital eagles. And it's also, a role that Barclays has played. I'm sure we talked about it years ago.
Yeah, I love the digital eagles. I want to talk about that, definitely.
We'll come back to that one. So there is no doubt if you look at challenges and the challenger banks and what they have been able to do to engage in the younger demographic in particular, it has become a real challenge to the incumbent banks. You see that by the number of people that are acquiring are opening current accounts where data is published. Still, the majority, as you'd expect, are opening accounts through the incumbent banks, and that's just simply a fact of the mathematics of the share that the incumbents have. But it is changing, and I think there's learnings on both sides. So when we ask customers, what do you include in your choice of where you bank? And there will be a variety of answers, and some of those are particularly for the younger demographic around personalisation. They really engage with video coaching, helping out with money management and the like. Others will say, and that's a pro for the challengers, and the incumbents need to be able to respond to that changing demographic requirement. For those that are more likely to bank with one of the incumbents, they do like the longevity. So Barclays is over 330 years old. And when I'm talking about my deposits, even though there's an £85,000 government-backed banking guarantee, for some people, there is something there that my money feels safer just because you've been around for ages and you get that. Also, there is still, interestingly, a link to having branches and being able to speak to somebody in person if I need to. Now, I think most people would say, if I can do everything on the phone, then that's a very good outcome. But there is something in my psyche that says, but if I do need to go and talk to someone, I know that there is a branch in the high street or close by. Yeah. So for the incumbents, it's like leveraging your history and your age, the fact that you do have physical locations in addition to your digital, having a look at what the challengers have done so well and continue to do so well in engaging particularly the younger demographic. And then for the challengers, it's about doing more with those customers. How do you take more of them from being a secondary account and not a primary account? How do you get their salary credits? How do you move into lending and mortgages? And Charles mentioned about Revolut getting the first stage of its banking license. Will open up opportunities for them. So it is an interesting tussle, and it's a really good situation for consumers where they have got choice, and that was the reason why, of course, we kicked off Volt in Australia, was to bring that sort of competition to the Australian market, and that's sadly lacking. So back in to my old mates there in Australia, I do hope that we can see some of the sort of challenger competition that is doing a little better in terms of scaling up here in the UK.
Yeah, you talk about obviously trust, and obviously trust for banks is still, keep my money safe, keep my details secure, and globally it's banks number one on the index, followed by schemes, followed by the challenger banks and the neobanks that have significantly increased their trust, but they're still quite far behind the banks, and it is part of the psyche. I remember going way back to the financial crisis in Australia, and we were doing focus groups with customers about why, how they define trust, and they said, I don't want to go to the branch. I just want to be able to see it when I walk down the street. I want it to be made of bricks and mortar, and to know it's there and it exists and my money is in it somewhere in a physical form. And that psyche is going to take quite a while, I think, to kind of dissipate as we move through. But just coming on to challenges. So one of the challenges, there's obviously different challenges whether you're a neobank or a traditional player, but one of the common challenges, and this is something that we're seeing globally with a much greater preponderance towards Asia and the Middle East, I have to be clear, is the rise of the banking super app, the ability to really own the customer transactional experience in that super app. And I think globally 60% of consumers, again it's skewed heavily towards Asia, are interested in the idea of a banking super app. And a couple of months ago we had Mohammed Karain, who's global head of digital banking at Standard Chartered, on the show, and he was chatting about the need to be present rather than trying to bring the customer to you, the need to be present where the customer is, and to be a chat first organization, so to speak. Now, when we look at how appealing is the idea of a banking super app where all your banking and your non-banking functions are contained within a single app, we see massive divergences depending on geography. Obviously, there's a huge interest in Asia. There's much more reticence and reluctance, as there often is, towards new technologies in the Western markets, Australia, the US, and Canada in particular. But the UK is really way far behind everyone else, and there's a deep-seated reluctance, suspicion, whatever the driver is, where globally it's 60%, only 3%, including the under 30s, genuinely want to see an app that contains banking and non-banking functionality. I suspect a lot of that is being driven by concerns of fraud and cybersecurity, which we'll come on to in a second. But when you're thinking about being chat first, when trying to adopt the bank, keeping the legacy of the branches, but also trying to adopt the bank and to move into chat channels and things, what are some of the things that you're kind of thinking about rolling out from your position at Barclays?
It's a really good question, and that point on the geographic differences is so true, isn't it? I was in India a couple of months ago, and it seems like everything was done on WhatsApp. It didn't matter whether you're arranging something for dinner or transport to the airport or your accommodation, and banking is kind of all done digitally there, and the super apps are growing. Even looking closer to here, some of the challenges where you get on your plane and you land at the airport and you're getting SIM cards and the like. It may not be living your complete life through the one app, but it's getting there. Certainly in our experience with our customers, there has been, to that point in the UK, I want to keep my money separate for whatever reasons, and some of that is security. So banking done in one spot and non-banking in others. It's going to, we're placing a really close focus on what's happening, not just here in the UK, but overseas. And do we need to bring in more functionality into our own offering, which is really focused on banking at the moment. So that for us is a watching. It's a watching brief. So I don't have that crystal ball to say what the answer will be, but we're seeing it here in the UK as well with some of the challenges that are pushing more into the super banking app space and doing it very well. So incumbents like Barclays typically focused on making that banking experience better and more efficient, but also keeping an eye on, well, do we need to look at doing more than simply banking? The other thing that I would mention to that respect really is banking as a service and partnership banking, embedded finance, something we were very much focused on with Volt. And as we see consumers' behaviour change and doing more on smartphones and apps and the like, and less with the physical points of representation, they're also more inclined and more comfortable to do banking and make payments and arrange financing through a trusted partner, whether that be a mortgage broker or a large retailer. So in Barclays' case, we have really close relationships with Avios, with Apple and Amazon, where we offer financing to customers who are buying things on platforms. And that's an interesting space for large incumbent banks, where typically you have grown up dealing with customers directly, maybe mortgages through mortgage brokers here in the UK, as has been popular for a number of years, but you had acquired your customers and managed them directly. Now you are seeing people doing more banking, not just through their smartphone, but through partners. If you want to be involved in that partnership banking, embedded finance, banking as a service, you need to change your mindset. And that is, you don't dictate where banking products and payments will be offered to customers. That is all managed via the partner. So it requires a mindset change. Then you need to have the technology that can work so you can be comfortable around issues, not just in operational functionality, but cyber security, data security. You need to have a core competency in being able to manage the commercial arrangements, particularly when you're dealing with large partners who are so adept and effective at commercial negotiations. But if you can get those things right, there's an opportunity to grow outside of your own ecosystem. And that's certainly something I'm excited about with Barclays. And as I said, particularly given that was kind of the primary focus with Voltbank. So a long-winded answer there, Charles, to a really interesting set of both UK and global consumer behaviour changes.
Well, partnerships is such an interesting piece, isn't it, Steve? Like it really, and that kind of comes back to you marrying your passions, right? And I'll say there are two passions. You've got that sort of innovative fintech neobank mindset, and that's why you did everything you did with Volt. I mean, not every MD of banking around the world has gone and started their own bank. So you're bringing that into a traditional organization, that sort of mindset, and then I would have thought you would have been a great person at a traditional bank to look for the right partners, because you know what that partner looks like, because you've actually been one of them before, or in that sense. You spoke a bit about cybersecurity there, and fraud's obviously such a huge piece, and something just to be taken so seriously. I want to chat a little bit about that sort of security piece with the AI lens on, and we've spoken to a number of different guests on the podcast about AI and its relevance and people's perceptions and feelings about it. When we think about mobile wallet usage in the UK, it has increased exponentially, 32%, while cash, debit and credit have all declined. The drivers of wallet uptake, they remain the same as ever. The speed, the ease, the convenience, we've heard that over the years now. How does Barclays marry that with the increased need for cybersecurity, as you were talking about? We can see fraudulent activity just growing exponentially as well. What role do you see AI playing in that sense, and how big of a role will AI have in the Barclays proposition and everything that you do within your role?
Yeah, it's certainly going to play a growing role, and some of that is for positive, and some of that, of course, is scary. With AI impersonation and the like. So we've got a really key focus on that, and the number of trials going on at the moment right across Barclays, typically focused with helping colleagues serve customers. And be more in the moment rather than ticking boxes from a QA type perspective, but a focus on where AI can be used for bad as well. I've had more exposure in the last few months to both fin crime and fraud, and particularly the scams and the social media impersonations. And it's scary and it's sad to see what is going on, and the amount of effort we put into both trying to detect those frauds first and then compensate customers when they are defrauded and they are scammed. It is a growing part of the banking organisation. A lot of effort is going into not just working with AI, but it's around education, and it's around trying to get the whole ecosystem working more effectively together. So come back at some stage, if we've got time, on digital legals and that focus, not just teaching people how to do things digitally, but also on education around scams and frauds and the like. Here we are seeing, like we are globally, most of the fraud is emanating through social media, and there's definitely a greater role for the social media platforms and for the big telcos to play. So in terms of liability, who compensates the customers when something goes wrong? It is the bank. And if the 7th of October here in the UK is a really important date for banking and payments comes to play out, there is a change to the fraud regime, and that is where, unless customers have been really negligent or have been the frauds to themselves, where there is a fraud, the paying bank and the receiving bank will compensate the customer who's out of pocket 50-50. So there'll be an arrangement, and then for the first time we'll bring in payment companies, so not just a small handful of banks. That has, and the compensation amount, the maximum compensation amount is £415,000. So it's hefty, and with that there are naturally concerns. The positives are people will be laser focused more than they have been in the past. What we need to see, though, are the social media platforms and the telcos who talk about this as an issue and we're going to do something. Nothing helps you get focused more than you needing to write a check and participate in that compensation, and that doesn't exist today. The new government has talked about that in the lead up into the election, and that's something as an industry the banks are pushing for as well, because there's just not enough reliance you can't rely enough on the social media platforms to play their part as well. So a really interesting changing of the landscape here in the UK, and I imagine that is going to be getting global focus because it is an issue globally, not just here in the UK. And again, Chloe, just sharing some things that, like I did with the branches and how we replace those physical distribution points. The amount of effort that goes into helping vulnerable customers here in the UK is certainly greater than it is in Australia. So if you're listening to calls with our call agents, if they're detecting anything at all that may indicate that a customer is suffering some form of vulnerability, they take it seriously, that they act on it. There's more assistance handing out to customers. We have teams that focus on the more complex frauds, and these are things like romance scams, where it is just heartbreaking to look through real examples where people at a vulnerable stage of their life, often over many, many months, are taken advantage of. And when you detect something as a bank and point that out to a customer, it can be terribly hard, where customers will say, you're taking away my chance of happiness, and it's my money and I can do what I like with it. And there are occasions where the customer, it is their money and they can do what they like, and we'll come back, many months later and say, you shouldn't have let me do that. And it's a difficult situation. So we've gone working with police now right across the UK, where we think that someone is being a victim of crime, will actually go and talk to the customers. We've got really sophisticated approaches to people in these difficult situations, having one agent in the bank who will talk to them. And we suggest that they go and talk to their family, who can often say mum or dad or family member, this is not right. But there's a lot of this stuff that happens, which is not just an AI solution. It's so much about education, helping people as individuals.
Can I encourage people who listen to the podcast just to go back a couple of episodes? I spoke with Dave Birch, who you probably know as well, Steve, or certainly have heard of. We have this exact conversation, and it's just balancing that. I mean, it's huge emotional turmoil and element, but then the bank's liable. And he was actually expressing his frustrations that even though the bank can, give us many warnings to not hand over your life savings to, this future fiance you've met in X, who doesn't actually exist, and you're just being catfished. And then the bank is still liable anyway. So it's just such a complex situation. I mean, and then onto your point about it being global, this is happening globally. Like the scams happening in Australia is happening all the time. It's all over the news. We all know about it. We all know someone who's been scammed. It's typically, for me, it's one of my friend's parents. I've plenty of, unfortunately, I know quite a few. It's a really tough situation. Sorry, Charlie, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention the same episode. And obviously every conversation we seem to have with clients now about, what's happening in the market, whether it's Singapore, Australia, Dubai, UK, US, security, fraud, P2P payments, it's a significant issue. We were talking to Rupert Lee Brown, who's the chairman and founder of Caxton's, the international money payments transfer. And we were discussing the joint liability that will come in on the 7th of October. I'm not going to comment on whether the regulators got it right. It's well-intentioned. There's going to be a huge amount of admin, and it is going to improve the focus on it. Whether they've got the right solution, I think is highly debatable. He made the point that it's like if your car is stolen and it's a Ford Transit car, Ford is responsible for replacing the car, which obviously is not the case. So there's going to be lots of implications. One of the implications, and I'll come back to talking about digital eagles in a second, is obviously going to be for the neobanks, because the FCA stats and the Payment Advisory Board stats in the UK show that if you lose money through Monzo or any other of the neobanks compared to a NatWest or a Nationwide, you're significantly less likely to get it back, and that's obviously going to be an increasingly an issue as Revolut get their banking license, as Monzo launch new accounts. Their inability to perhaps behave as responsibly as some of the traditional banks in this space. So kind of final question, you've obviously been you've been gamekeeper turned poacher turned gamekeeper. So you've kind of gone Barclays to Volt and back to Barclays. So you've got a really good view of both sides of the story. So how do you think it's going to play out with the neobanks? I mean, as you said earlier, they've obviously got some strengths. They've obviously they're great at providing competitive drive for the traditional players. They're starting to win a bit more in the UK. We're seeing in our stats in converting those main bank relationships. Still small numbers, but growing quite substantially. So how do you think it's going to play out? And to tee you up, is Digital Eagles one of the things that you're responding with? So to give you a chance to talk a bit about that.
Thanks, Charles. Look, as the challenges become incumbents in their own right, there is going to be more of a focus for them to be banks, and that is, for things like fraud reimbursement, there will be legal adders that show, what percentage of frauds are you reimbursing, and you're right, they're lower at the moment. Pressure will rightly come on them to say, hold on, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Yeah. You need to be a participant in the banking industry. And if you are going to serve customers, it's not just going to be about a cool app and some of the things you do. There are really hard banking challenges that you're going to need to participate like everyone else in solving as well. So that will be interesting to see. On the Digital Eagle program, it's actually not something that's happened more recently.
Yeah, it's been going almost 10 years, hasn't it?
Yeah, just over 10 years, I think. And there were two people who really were the founders of this Digital Eagle program, which I love. One was a guy called Stephen Roberts, who only recently retired from Barclays. And I caught up with him for breakfast the other day. He's one of my favourite people. And a guy called Ashok Vaswani, who was head of the Barclays UK. They were the two drivers behind this. And the thinking was this. Stephen, I used to call a mad professor because he was this, kind of futurist. And as the world was moving more digital, he went and bought all of these iPads, and maybe there was one for every branch, or there might have been a few more for bigger branches. And that was to do digital servicing transactions and the like. And what we quickly discovered is our staff quite often didn't have digital skills themselves. And so we set about building this Digital Eagle program that was originally about training staff on how to use digital. And then it morphed to helping customers. And so I don't know whether the YouTube videos are still on.
It's still on. It's still on. I watched it the other day.
These are tear jerkers, where you see people who are unwrapping iPads for the first time and reconnecting with long lost relatives across the other side of the earth. And it's like, wow, these are life-changing things. So, and it moved beyond just staff doing the becoming digital eagles. And I think we have 10,000 of our staff who are qualified digital eagles. Then it moved into cool areas like, for those of us who weren't the youngsters, we were termed silver eagles. And quite often we would work more closely with our customers or members of the community that were closer to our own age. And that still happens today. So a big focus of the physical presence that we have in the UK is not just about helping with Barclays banking needs specifically. It's also about that digital education. And we just touched on the frauds and the scams, and a big focus there on education as well. But more recently, Digital Eagles morphed to having this skilling program called Digital Wings. And it helps people, again, with digital skills. And there were over 600,000 people that did some sort of digital training last year that the Digital Eagle program helped. I think we've helped more than 40,000 kids learn to code this year. I'm only halfway through the year. So this is a way that a big bank can act out on its social responsibility. And that is, it doesn't really matter that you're a Barclays customer or not. But we need to play our role in making sure people aren't left behind. There will always be people, particularly members of the vulnerable community, who won't be able to go down the digital route, but others that will need to. And it's not just about banking, it's about the way that as we get into our later years, we're going to have to live our lives digitally to the point it can overcome loneliness and all those sorts of things. And that's one of the real privileges that large incumbent banks have, is being able to give back to the community. So Digital Eagles is still going a decade in. And I don't think when Stephen ordered those iPads and sent them out to branches, he kind of knew the impact that it would have, a decade on.
Yeah, I remember talking to Ashok and to in 2016 and to Catherine, which she was head of Barclays UK. I think she's CEO of ASB in New Zealand now. And the story that became a YouTube video of the grandfather going in and using the iPad to Zoom his grandson in Sydney, I think, for the first time, and hadn't spoken to him for 6 months, and his absolute joy at being able to do so. But yeah, the notion of traditional banks having the ability to give back to the community, I think that's a fantastic note to wrap up this chat on. So thank you. Thank you very much for your time this morning, first thing on a Monday morning. So it's been fascinating talking to you. I know both myself and Chloe have enjoyed catching up with you as usual. And from myself, yeah, look forward to talking to you again soon, and maybe grabbing a flat white down in Canary Wharf. There's an excellent Australian barista down there I know of that we can grab one there at some point in the future.
I look forward to it, Charles, and great to catch up with you and Chloe. And thanks for the invitation to join you today.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Look forward to seeing this next installation out in the UK and seeing everything you bring back to Barclays. They're lucky to have you back.
It's very nice of you to say. It's great to be back.